And welcome into the Bruins beat on CLNS Media. My name is Evan Marinofsky, and today's a mailbag. It's just us talking. Hope you guys had a great July 4th. For my American listeners, for the people who live in Canada who listen to this, hope you had a great Canada Day. And if you're anywhere else in the world, hope you just had a great day in general. Anyways, today is a mailbag day. As I said, it's just us talking. No Connor Ryan this week, so it's just us. And I asked for some questions on Twitter. As always, you guys delivered amazingly. The best part is that a lot of these questions are different. They're not all the same. I'm always worried that they're all going to be kind of the same question. There's some overlap. Some people sent in a few questions and they overlap with others. So I kind of just took the one question they had that was kind of on its own, didn't overlap with other stuff. So lots of good questions this week. And we'll dive right in. We will dive right in. So I got a question actually right before I started recording from Eugene Manorino. He asked, any chance the Bruins will get back into round one? And I believe he's talking round one of the 2022 NHL draft, not round one of the playoffs next year. My answer is it's a good question. I don't see them jumping back in, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. I think if they, I think they have the assets that if they really wanted to get back in, they could. But I might think that might take a little too much. Little too much, especially if it looks like with Bergeron returning, they're probably going to try to compete for a Stanley Cup again. This could hurt their chances. My whole theory has been starting with next year's 2023 NHL draft, which everybody's regarding as the next 2015 in terms of talent, which to you Bruins fans probably is not encouraging to hear. But that's when I think you start building through the draft more. If you're really going to go for it again, maybe you do try to run it back. And you don't you hold off on getting back into the first round this year. So I don't expect them to, but it wouldn't shock me. And the way Jake DeBrusk played down the stretch, which we'll get to DeBrusk trade ideas later in this episode, with the way DeBrusk played down the stretch, maybe a team bites on him for a first. Maybe, it's hard to tell. The trade market's weird. Teams will overpay for a guy like Jake DeBrusk, who was a first line winger throughout most of the second half and a lot of that Carolina series. So who knows? But I would be more surprised if they did than if they didn't, just with the way things are going. So that's on the 2022 NHL draft front. I believe Connor and I will have a full episode looking at the draft and things like that later in this week. But for now, that's really the only draft question I got. Again, that's mainly because the Bruins don't have a pick in this first round, which has become a theme, which has become a kind of a bad theme that the Bruins have had the past bunch of years. Cost of doing business, I guess, in terms of competing, but still not great nonetheless. A question from @Jeremy855-48416. It's a hell of a number right there. With a new coach and system and little to no cap space currently, would it be the best idea to give the 2C spot to Jack Studnicka for the season for one last chance to see what we can get out of him? I think this is a good idea. It's a little outside the box. And this would only be a good idea if they were rebuilding. Because if the Bruins with Studnicka as the second line center if Studnicka was great, then great. You got something there. Finally he's come to, you maybe have a top six center in him. And if he's not good, doesn't matter because you're trying to lose anyways. They're not trying to lose this year. At least that's the feeling. Again, it has not been made clear by management yet. I'm really only going off that with Bergeron reportedly returning. So to me, again, I don't think Studnicka is going to be in the top six this year, at least to start. I think they are going to do something at 2C, which we'll get to in a bit. They should, especially if they're gonna keep trying to go for cups. I do think, however, with Studnicka, with Jim Montgomery as head coach, I do think he's going to get a look in the bottom six, which I've been kind of saying for a while. I think that's the route they want to take, go a little bit younger in the bottom six. So I do think he will get another shot, which again, this is 3 straight years now that they've been hoping that he's going to pan out. I'm also curious what Studnicka gets as an RFA this offseason. So cool idea if they were rebuilding. If they're going for it, not so much. I know they're cap constrained, but I do think there are options you can do to get out of that. I think at least we'll try to exercise those options this offseason. Question from @Odysseus_Toro. What specific players will benefit the most out of Montgomery as the bottom six set in stone with in-house / minor league players, or is there need for UFA signings? What UFAs are realistically available? So best bet for who's going to play better under Montgomery. You know that when Brad Marchand returns, he's probably going to be still an elite player. You know, you wonder how he's going to be after the surgery, but I do think he's still going to be an elite player. Pastrnak, same thing. Bergeron, you know, still going to be a top pairing, not top pairing, a number one center. I think the best bet will be the younger players. The best bet, I do believe, will be the younger players. I mentioned Studnicka already. Trent Frederick's another. Oscar Steen. For the roster regulars, I think it's safe to say Jake DeBrusk is due. If they keep him, if they do decide to keep him, I think he would be a guy who would benefit from a fresh voice. It was no secret that him and Cassidy were not, you know, harmonious. Credit to both of them for sticking it out the rest of the season. You know, the way that DeBrusk was able to play, and Cassidy put him up on line one with Marchand and Bergeron. So clearly that worked out. But I think Jake DeBrusk will 100% benefit from a new coach, especially a guy like Montgomery, who is known as a player's coach, known as a guy who's, you know, positive reinforcement, all those types of things. Another one's Brandon Carlo. I think there's a chance Carlo could see kind of a little bit of a bounce back year, which we'll get to later as well. That was another kind of question I got about him. And part of that is, I think, Montgomery's puck possession style, the way they go through the neutral zone. You know, the breakout is not quick ups. It's a lot of see what the other team is giving you in terms of neutral zone coverage and defense and things like that. That might benefit a guy like Carlo. Now, Carlo's thing ultimately his downfall the past couple of years has been D-zone coverage. Because again, Brandon Carlo is not being looked to be this, you know, offensive dynamo back there. He's mainly looked at as, can you shut down the other team? And that's something he struggled with in recent years. So I look at Carlo and I think there's a chance he could benefit from a new coach. I do. Also, there will also be a new D coach this year with Kevin Dean being let go as well. You asked also, or Odysseus also asked, is the bottom six set in stone, and is there a need for UFA signings? No. Bruins spent all of last offseason signing guys for the bottom six. Nosek, Hala, Foligno. I know Hala did not end the season in the bottom six. He worked his way up to 2C, but that was not why he was signed initially. It was that looked like a guy who, again, was in the bottom six for the first half of the year. So you do not need to sign anybody in the bottom six, because also you have a lot in the system. You have a lot on the team. You have, Coyle and Smith. If Smith doesn't get dealt, you have Frederick, you have Mark McLaughlin, Oscar Steen, Jack Studnicka. You have six right there who you could make as your bottom six. You could just formulate those guys and plug in place, and suddenly you have a bottom six with those six guys. That doesn't even include Nosek and Foligno. So there should not be any focus on the bottom six when it comes to UFAs. UFAs available. Elliot Friedman reported that Vinny Trocheck is a guy the Bruins have their eye on. Not the only team with their eye on Vinny Trocheck. Got to be a little careful giving too much money to a Prius, as Brad Marchand would alert to. But I do think that realistically, it's tough to include Claude Giroux, even though I do believe that is the best fit in terms of what the Bruins want, need, where they're going. Like, he is the best fit, but I don't see him leaving Florida. Nazem Kadri is another that a lot of people look at for obvious reasons. He's the number one center on the market. I think there's going to be a lot of suitors for him. A lot of people willing to throw money at him. Colorado, I believe, has expressed they want to bring him back, which would be wild with the way that roster is constructed, but they could do it. So, again, the Bruins have about $2.3 million in cap space. Not a ton to play around with. Not a lot there to get creative, which we will get creative in a little bit. We will get creative in a little bit. There's another question from @SeanEdmonds11 with a new voice in the room with Jim Montgomery at the helm. Will we see Studnicka, Zaboral, and maybe even Vakanainen get steady ice time in the NHL? Now, Urho Vakanainen was traded to the Anaheim Ducks, so he is not going to be getting any ice time with the Bruins this year. But again, this goes along with the question earlier about Studnicka. Studnicka will get, I do believe, a long look in the lineup at some capacity. I think that's going to be part of Montgomery's job, is to give those younger kids a longer leash. Again, if they make a mistake, they're not immediately taken off the ice. So I do think that is one thing that I think you will see Studnicka, especially with Montgomery. Zaboral is an interesting one because he gets forgot about a lot. Zaboral, again, tore his ACL last December, I believe. And again, it was such bad timing for that. Not that it's ever a good time to tear your ACL, but that was a really bad time considering he was having a great year. He was steady. He was in the lineup every night. Again, was he the top 4 defenseman they drafted? Absolutely not. But he was a reliable number 5 or number 6 defenseman who could play both sides, by the way, right and left. So, it looks like Zboril should be ready for the start of camp. And again, with Grzelcyk and McAvoy out for the start of the season, you have to think Zboril will get a look. And again, that's another left shot defenseman on this team. They got a lot. That's going to be a place they got to make decisions on, because you can't be like 6 deep on the left side with NHL talent when you have holes in other parts of the roster that you got to fill. So I do think Studnicka and Zboril will get steady ice time at the NHL level, at least to start. Again, I think if you get 20 games on Studnicka and you got 2 points and he's I don't mean, plus minus is not the end all be all, but just off the top of my head, if he's a -4 or something, hard to keep him in longer. So that is the deal with that. Question from @Jason_C4431. If you were Donnie on July 13th, what moves are you pulling off to upgrade your roster? Also factor in that you have roughly 12 to 14 million to work with because you traded DeBrusk, Mike Riley, Foligno, and Smith. That's a lot. So I went through the math and I actually did all these things. So I didn't in this scenario, because clearly Jason_C4431 loves fun stuff. So I'm for it. Nick Foligno isn't getting traded. Nick Foligno's best bet is to get bought out. And that would, I believe he would cost them, if he is bought out, like 1.9 million in cap for next year. So all in all, with what they currently have in cap space, plus those guys getting dealt and Foligno getting bought out, they have about 14.33 million in cap space in this situation, which would be quite a lot. So first order of business, 14.33 million, you would spend that on center depth. You'd spend that on the second line center. So if I was in charge, here's what I would do. Throw the bag at Claude Giroux on a 2 to 3 year deal. You throw a lot of money per year at him. Now, again, it's a lot, but he fits perfectly in what they're trying to do, right? The Bruins, the cup, they just keep extending the cup window every, 1 year, another year. You're not looking for a long-term fix there because there's no one on this market that you're building your team around. You don't have like a Tomas Hertl, who would have been a perfect fit as the number 1 center for the next 10 years. There's nobody on this market that is going to do that. Even Nazem Kadri is 32. So to me, it's Claude Giroux, right? You're going to keep competing for 1 to 2 more years. You say, hey, Claude, we're going to go for it completely. We're going to re-sign Pasta. We're going to do all these things. We're going to go for a cup again. And I know he wants to stay in Florida, but again, if you have that space, you have the leverage to say, hey, we're going to offer you even a little bit more. Again, money talks. Money can get people to do things. So again, not a guarantee, but that would be my first order of business. I'm not as high on Kadri as others are in this market, or at least some others. Again, the age gets me a bit. He's 31. I think I said he was 32 earlier. I think he'll be 32 in October. But again, 31 right now. The season he just put up feels a little like an outlier. Again, he was in a really good situation. And again, if you put him on this Bruins team, he's between Hall and Pastrnak most likely. Again, a good situation. But the longevity is not great. I worry about him because, again, 3 to 4 years down the road, if this is a bad contract, if he signs a 6-year deal or a 7-year deal even, which would be a lot, that'd go up to like age 39, 40. But if you sign a deal around there and you're 2, 3, 4 years in and you're regretting it, and he's gotten, 6 or 7 million per season, he might even get more in this market, honestly. But if it's around there and you're regretting that contract and you got to deal a first round pick to get rid of his contract, when you need those first round picks, that's not going to look good. Because as you've seen over the past bunch of years, the Bruins have given away firsts to get rid of contracts. I mean, they had to basically get rid of the John Moore contract, David Backes contract. This is going to be a time 2 to 3 years down the road when you do not want to be giving up first round picks. You're going to want to draft those guys in the first round. So again, Kadri might be really good for next year, maybe even the year after, but where the Bruins are down the road, I don't know if you want a potential regrettable contract on the books in Nazem Kadri. Again, his play style fits this team perfectly. That's the thing. That's the tough part about Kadri is it's a great play style. I think he would fit well. You'd get production. I just question where the team's going. Now, again, if they got a Stanley Cup in year one, they got a Stanley Cup next year with Kadri at second line center, it's all worth it. But if they don't, and suddenly you have a regrettable contract on your hands, you got an issue. So again, you got a lot of cap space in this situation. And by the way, this hasn't happened yet. This is just the question I was asked. Want to get nuts though? Johnny Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau and Jim Montgomery have a terrific relationship. They work together in the USHL. There's a guy, Johnny Gaudreau. Now the thing with Gaudreau, be a lot of money. It'd be a fair amount of that 14.33 million in cap space, but that is guaranteed production on the wing. That is a for sure top six winger. The question is, if you got Johnny Gaudreau, would that make Taylor Hall expendable? Because suddenly, you know, you've got a lot tied up in top six wingers, which again, I guess is a good thing for now. You know, I guess in that situation, you have Marchand, Pastrnak, and then you'd have Taylor Hall and you have Jake DeBrusk now. So that would be a good top six. You know, if you have Gaudreau, Hall, Pastrnak, Marchand, awesome. That's maybe the best top six group of wingers in the league. But does that, you know, do they re-sign Pastrnak with that? It's an interesting question. You know, do they devote that money to Pastrnak? I mean, again, if you have Pastrnak and Gaudreau and Hall, that's a really good top six going forward. I know they have Marchand as well. And then, you know, again, I think I mentioned Taylor Hall being expendable in that situation, has a modified no trade clause. Then you could probably get away with dealing Hall and not be hurt because you have Johnny Gaudreau there. So again, that's what I would do with that money. I think you got to go big, especially with this. And those are all guys I mentioned who fit the team short-term and long-term. So good stuff all around. Jason, thank you for the fun. And now we go back to reality with the 2.3 million in cap space. So now it's not as fun. Now it's like we've deflated. It's like that post-concert high wears off and just go right back to everything being normal. Question from Tommy Bennett, not Tony Bennett, Tommy Bennett. If you are Sweeney, what are you doing to construct the team? Are you using a buyout? Who do you look to add? Bergeron is returning, so contending is a must. You're correct, Tommy. Contending is a must, I think, this year. I don't think Bergeron is going to come back to rebuild, unless I'm wrong. Maybe he will. Again, I've always thought all along if Bergeron left, a full rebuild or, you know, a 1 year or 2 year rebuild would work. But my first order of business, again, love Nick Foligno, the guy, love him, the leader, locker room presence. I do think you have to buy him out. 3.8 million on the books for next season is not ideal, especially given that his roster spot is in the bottom six. At times looked like he was in the roster last year solely because he was a locker room presence, solely because he made, you know, more than the other guys in the bottom six. I think a buyout would have to take place again, and that would bring the cap down to 1.93 million this upcoming season, and then I believe like 900,000 the next year, so a lot more palatable. Again, hate to watch him leave. You know, you don't want to see a guy like him go, a leader like him, but for the sake of this team and for his roster spot, I think you got younger guys there that can do it a lot cheaper. That's what I think. And again, I think they brought Foligno in thinking he could be more of a presence in the top six last year, and just never really worked out. It never did. So I would that would be my first order of business. Then I would try and deal Mike Riley. That would free up about 3 million in cap space, which would be very good. And as I mentioned earlier, this organization's got more than enough puck moving left shot defensemen. You know, you got Grzelcyk, you got Lindholm. A lot of people have mentioned trading Grzelcyk. I think that's the guy you hold on to. Now with this, you know, him being out through opening night, that's a little bit harder to deal. I know Riley is injured now as well, but I think he'll be ready for opening nights. It's a little different. You also got Jack Ashan in the organization. You got Jakub Zaboral that we mentioned already. So you've got guys on the left side who can move the puck. So I would free up that 3 million in cap space. You also have to think again, you know, are you going to move Jake DeBrusk still? I feel like his value is high, at least for him, but we really don't know the trade request yet. Is it still in? Is it not? You know, has that been rescinded? So if they believe that they can free up even more, that's 4 million right there. Another one's Craig Smith. That would free up a fair amount of cap space, over 3 million. So with that space, as I mentioned before, you know, you've got options. You can go out and sign a second line center if you so choose. But I still believe, I think, and we have not mentioned this yet, the best option at 2C for next year is David Krejci. It's David Krejci. I'm sorry to make everyone, the Krejci thing is the fire that keeps getting stoked, and it's been doing so for a year now. But I do believe if you want your best fit, because again, Claude Giroux is really the best fit, but I don't think he's leaving Florida. And you don't have all the money in the world. And I don't think they're going to do all of these things. Is just what I would do. Krejci's the best bet. Krejci's the best realistic bet. Now, again, that's kind of convincing David Krejci to actually come back, but that's your best bet. It's your best bet. Because again, Krejci and Bergeron probably play another year, max 2 years. You get Krejci between Pastrnak and Hall. That's a great second line that's producing. And again, I don't care that Krejci, as Connor Ryan said, played against plumbers in the Czech league. I still think, again, with those guys on his left and right flank, I think you're getting a really good product. And he's not coming expensive. And again, it pushes the center dilemma down a year or two. You get another, you get more drafts, you get more options, and you don't break the bank. You don't cap constrain yourself. Again, Kadri could be a regrettable deal down the line. So I think Krejci's probably your actual best bet. That leaves another thing. If they do get a second line center this year, do you trade Erik Haula? Value's high. It's not a terrible cap hit. The value is high. And maybe you could make a case that you'd have a third line of Haula, Coyle, and Smith, and that'd be great. But you do have a lot, as I mentioned, you have a lot of young guys in that bottom six. It would not surprise me if the bottom six is comprised mostly of young guys, at least start the year. You could get something for Haula, whether it's, a second or third round pick, or you deal him for another asset, a player for player swap. You could. And again, that only comes if you do get a second line center and you're confident that that second line center is actually going to be a legitimate second line center. So that's what I would do if I'm the Bruins. I think it's all stuff you try to do that works in the short term and doesn't constrain yourself with the cap long term. Question from Jason Connolly. Hey, Evan, what's up from Australia? Ooh, Australia. I wanted to actually go study abroad in Australia my junior year of college. But COVID was a big thing. And I remember kind of seeing that and going, I don't know if I want to travel in this and plan a huge excursion to Australia. And then, of course, everybody got sent home. All my friends that were abroad got sent home in those COVID months of March 2020. It was frantic. So I was kind of happy that I didn't go. But Australia is a place I want to go to really bad, Jason. So he's saying, what's up from Australia? Shout out to Connor. Shout out to you and Connor. You guys are my info in Australia. Thank you very much. I love to hear people listening globally, like worldwide. I think that's so cool. So thank you, Jason. My question is, do you think we can find a second line center or top six center from the free agency market? And who do you think we should look at? So I've kind of hit on these already. To me, if I were to rank my three free agent centers, I would go Claude Giroux 1, Nazem Kadri 2, Vinny Trocheck 3. The reason Kadri would be over Trocheck would be simply because I think in this lineup, they could use a little grit. And if you're going to get it from someone like him, I think Cam Neely would love a Nazem Kadri. I think that would fit in perfectly with kind of his post-season or end of season comments. So I think Kadri would fit. It's the cap constraints, man. I know that's probably the most common word used, the common used word I have said in this episode. But I do think that it's just tough with the money and with the years. If he was a little younger, I would be all in on this because he would be a Bruin. That's the thing. Like, it's funny. I've seen some people, and I mentioned this in previous episodes. Seen some people on Twitter being like, "No, I don't want Nazem Kadri here. No. He's awful and all these things, and he's dirty." And it's like, if you had Nazem Kadri, you would love him. You would love Nazem Kadri. Don't kid yourself. So again, and I mentioned earlier also this, realistically, given the situation with the cap, David Krejci, that's your guy. And I know running it back, everything, but that's what's the early signs on this 2022-23 Bruins is they're going to be running it back. At least that's what it feels like. So again, Krejci's probably your guy. Also to mention, they don't have a lot of cap space, as I've already said many times. So they do have to get creative with that or how they free up that cap space. Question from @MaxCan_. If Krejci is not back, thoughts on acquiring Sean Monahan from Calgary, since it is rumored they are buying him out because they need cap space to lock up Gaudreau, Tkachuk, and Mangiapane, and already have a number 2 in Backlund. Better option than Haula, in my opinion. This is also a similar question from Jackson Poole. So I'm kind of answering both in this. I am not in favor of Sean Monahan. I have zero interest in Monahan. 2 straight down years. Season ending right hip surgery in April. You never know how a player is going to return from that. What's funny is when I was doing some pre-show prep, I typed in Sean Monahan. Top Google search result was or top like people also ask search result, what has happened to Sean Monahan? So I don't know about Monahan. I am not in favor of this. I understand the sentiment to try and invest when someone's value is low, get him, on the bargain bin. Clearly has shown in the past that he can play with great players and he's put up, points in the past. I just don't want another fringe top 6 guy on this Bruins team. You have enough. And I think we said this last year. Like the Bruins have fringe top 6 guys in surplus on this team. And again, Monahan's not a sure bet. Like all the guys I mentioned before, Giroux, Kadri, maybe even Trocheck are bona fide top 6 centers. Monahan has really fallen out of that. And yeah, you can say, hey, maybe a new coach, maybe a new place would benefit him. Not a huge fan. And again, with the buyout, it's hard to tell. But just to go off of what he's currently making, he's going to be heading into the final season of a deal with a $6.375 million cap hit. If I'm going to go up against Hala's cap hit is currently $2.375 million. So I think one has a lot more value than the other, just given points wise and also money wise. So I don't really want Monahan. That's been a guy that's been mentioned around here for a long time. I think the last 2 deadlines people mentioned Sean Monahan, or at least the last one. So I'm not a huge Sean Monahan guy. I don't think many people are. Interesting to see what happens with him out in Calgary. Because again, I think they thought he was going to be a core player of that roster. And he just wasn't this year. He wasn't the year before. And he really hasn't evolved along with Tkachuk and Gaudreau and the other guys they have on that roster. So I'm a no on Sean Monahan. Question from Orville Schredenbacher. That's a hell of a name. That's a great name. 3-part question. 3 parts, Orville. What the hell? Realistic 2C option if Krejci doesn't come back. Stick with Hala or look to add. Hypothetically, if the entire D was 100% healthy, does this team need to add another top 4 caliber D man, or is this good enough? And then actual realistic trade and free agent names to look for. So we have gone over the 2C spot quite a bit in this episode. So I've already answered Krejci and second line center stuff. So I will focus on parts 2 and 3 of this question, which have a lot to do with defensemen. The team really does not have enough right now, cap wise, to even handle their biggest issue, which is second line center. Top 4D is not really an issue, so there's no need to spend that extra money when you really just did. Hampus Lindholm, you just went out and traded for and signed long term. So you have Lindholm, McAvoy. That's a hell of a top pair, maybe best top pairing in the league, depending on how they do when McAvoy comes back and he's healthy. And you also have Grzelcyk and Carlo, who, again, you need to see more out of Carlo for sure, especially given his current contract. And Grzelcyk, you need a little more production out of. But that's a good top 4. That's not a top 4 that you need to go out and immediately get a guy. Like Ryan McDonough just got moved to Nashville, right? Now, again, if this was last year and they didn't have Hampus Lindholm, you would hope the Bruins would have been in on a Ryan McDonough. But now because they have Hampus Lindholm, you really don't need to be. So top 4D is not something they need to add to at all, at least right now. Again, if they're fully healthy, they should not have to add in the top 4. They've spent more than enough. They have, like 9.5 tied up in McAvoy. They have a lot in Lindholm and Carlo. So top 4 does not need to be touched. You asked realistic trade and free agent names to look for. So trade can be tough. Obviously everyone mentions like Pierre-Luc Dubois. But I was more focused on, what do they need? What's something, that they could add that would be cost efficient? And I was looking at free agent names. And I still think, because Josh Brown is a free agent, I don't think there's a huge desire to bring him back. If I'm looking at free agency, I'm looking to add a depth right shot defenseman. So not someone who is a top 4 guy. Again, you have McAvoy and Carlo for that. At least you pay him like that, at least with Carlo. Jan Ruta down in Tampa is a free agent. 6'2", 211 pounds, solid defensive defenseman, was a good depth guy in Tampa. Shouldn't cost you more than $2 million per season. I believe he's making $1.33 million now. That shouldn't be over $2 million for next season's, for his next deal. That's a guy I look at. And he's also won 2 cups with Tampa. So for me, that's a guy. That's a guy I look at and say that's a target. I know like last year it was Hakanpää, who ended up going to Dallas. So I do think you need to add a solid right shot defenseman who can be a depth guy, who can fill in. Injuries are going to hit the team as they hit everybody. So I think he's a guy who they should target, and get creative with it. Question from @Mr. Bruin, and Bruin is not spelled Bruin. It's spelled like Bruin, like it's Bruin beer. So I like that name too. What are some realistic 1-for-1 deals for Jake DeBrusk? Arnachas, Zacha, Dylan Strome, Puljujarvi. Really wouldn't want to do any of these. Really would not want to do any of these. Martin Necas is, showed a lot of promise in Carolina. I'm a fan. But if they were able to flip DeBrusk for a top 6 center, might be worth it. But if you're going to trade DeBrusk for another struggling-ish top 6 center, a fringe top 6 center, like Zacha, or like Dylan Strome was between 2 really good players this year. So if you're going to put Strome in the same situation, maybe it works out. But I don't know. Again, things look pretty good with DeBrusk. Things look fairly good with Jake DeBrusk right now. The price isn't too high, especially if you're going to keep him in the top 6. So again, wouldn't really die to do any of these, but if something were to pop up with a legit top 6 center, then sure. But none of these feel like someone, especially Puljujarvi, none of these feel like something that I would do a 1-for-1 on. Everyone 1-for-1 always people remember the Adam Larson for Taylor Hall deal. I don't think this would be that, but I don't think that I would be eager to do any of these. A question from good friend Reg Schofield, friend of the show, Reg Schofield. Pasta's future. Took a while for a Pasta question to come up, but Pasta's future, how realistic is a trade? And if they sign him long-term, what amount and length do you think would be solid? For me, my best guess, and by the way, I have all these on notes. I have all your questions like on big things on notes. So I got all these organized. I'm not like scrolling through my phone, through Twitter and stuff, because then I just get distracted. My best guess, David Pastrnak stays. They agree on a deal. And that basically makes it, he's not going to get traded if that happens. I think he likes it here. He's made no public statement that counters that. I know there was that Fluto report that there was someone close to Pastrnak who said he didn't like Sweeney. I still think something's going to get done. But if they sit down with him and he doesn't want to stay, you got to get traded. He's got to get traded. If he sits at the table and says, I do not want to be part of this team going forward, I'm not going to resign. You cannot let him go for nothing. Then he has to be dealt, because he would get you a lot. You would get a lot, because people like David Pastrnak do not enter the trade market very often. You would get a lot for David Pastrnak. And that would also probably signify a full rebuild. That would not be like a retool. That would be a full, basically, rebuild. Because even if you remember in 2015, when they dealt Lucic and Dougie Hamilton, neither of those guys had the impact or were like the caliber of player David Pastrnak was. So this would be a huge, like bigger than Joe, like on par with Joe Thornton kind of move. And almost similar to the Tyler Seguin trade. Again, hopefully the Bruins will get a lot more in return. And by the way, the Seguin trade, we're recording the day after the, I believe, 9-year anniversary of that happening. 9 years ago now, Tyler Seguin was dealt. As our friend Petrov McGuire would say, missing team breakfast. Maybe Jim Montgomery can get the guys to go to team breakfast now. As for a price for David Pastrnak, famously, Pastrnak has said, doesn't play hockey for the money. So what does that mean for this? He could easily command over 10 on the open market. I think if you can get him between 9 and 10 million, because he's going to get 8 years. If you can get him between 9 and 10 million per year, great value. If you could even get him to 8.5, which could feel like a low ball, but again, if he's still not playing hockey for the money and he wants, them to be less cap constrained, maybe he takes that. It wouldn't surprise me if Pastrnak took less, considering he took less on his last deal. So I would not expect Pastrnak to hold this team over the fire and say, you will pay me 11.7 million per year. You will pay me Artemi Panarin money. You will pay me Connor McDavid money. I don't expect him to do that, but I do expect him to get paid very well, either right with McAvoy or a teeny bit more. And I think it's worth it. Guys like him don't just grow on trees. Like that doesn't just happen. So all in for Pastrnak to stay. And I do think he will end up staying. Question from Will Highland. Who's the next captain when Bergeron retires? Marchand feels next in line, just given he's a veteran, seniority, age, success, worn the A more and more. Again, if he can kind of cut the antics, I think he's a really solid captain of this team. Kind of like is a good continuation of the Chara and Bergeron years in the sense of leadership. McAvoy is another prime candidate, your number one defenseman, maybe your most important player. He's a guy that could easily be. Brandon Carlo's another, although I see him more as like a permanent assistant, just given him and he struggled in past years. I know the captain does not have to be the best player on the team. This isn't like Squirts where, the best player is just the captain. There's a lot of times when the captain is not the best player on a team. It's the leader. Carlo is a leader. So he's another who could be in the mix for a C. An interesting one is Pastrnak, because I do believe if the Bruins sit down with David Pastrnak and say, look, we're going to try to run it back this year, but after that, we're going to try to do a retool. And we're going to rely heavily on you, if you resign long-term, to be a leader in this locker room. If Pastrnak's all in for that, there's a captain. There is a potential captain as well. Certainly an assistant, but potentially a captain. So I think you got those four guys right there, all vying for the captaincy. So those would be my four picks. I would say Marchand's probably most likely, given just the age. After that, it really McAvoy, Carlo, and Pastrnak all have legitimate cases for the C, or at very least, certainly an A on the jersey. No, but none of them can compare to when Nick Ritchie was the assistant captain for the final game of the 2021 season against Washington. We will never forget when Nick Ritchie was the assistant captain for that game. We will never forget when he wore a letter on his jersey. No, we will never. Anyways, question from @Disportif. Will Bruins fans and Bruins press corps ever hold the Jacobs accountable for the product on the ice in the same way they do for Sweeney, Neely, Cassidy, current players, bygone players, Bettman, other teams, and even some of their fellow fans? And why the F not? So this is weird. I've seen tons of media folks in Boston holding the Jacobs accountable. Again, anytime anyone mentions the Bruins still wanting to run it back again and again and again, everyone mentions they just want to make the playoffs, and everybody mentions how it's likely the Jacobs just want the playoff gate tickets. I've heard that so often over the past 2 months. And we've all said it. I don't know. Again, I think there's been plenty. There are times they get held accountable for not seeming like they're very involved. They've been available to the media in a long time. I believe Charlie Jacobs will be available coming up shortly. By shortly, I mean next week with Jim Montgomery and the new coach, I believe. And then also the reason that Neely and Sweeney get more coverage is because they're the ones putting the team together. They're the front office. They lead the front office. They're not the whole front office. There's a lot of great staff who work in the front office, but they're the leaders of the front office. They're the ones directly putting together the team. So yeah, they've gotten way more crap lately for the cap issues, for all of it. Neely just got a lot of negative press coverage for bringing back Don Sweeney. Don Sweeney gets a lot of negative press coverage. So they're the ones putting the team together. That's why they get the most positive and negative press coverage out of all those people. So we have another question. I believe it's the final question actually of today's show. And I don't think I missed anyone. If I did, it was because other questions overlapped. That's it. Hopefully I still got your question, even if you sent one in and I didn't directly reference it, because there were a lot about Krejci and the second line and centers and all those things. Question from Benjamin Dolomont. Your breakout candidate and bust candidate for next season. Predictions with 2 exclamation points. Well, Benjamin, these always get me in trouble. These predictions always get me in trouble. My breakout candidate, full season of Hampus Lindholm. When you looked at his time last season, really good when he was in the lineup. And I do think he's a guy who I could absolutely see being a great fit on this team this season, and a guy who puts up a good amount of points, gets a lot of shots through to the net. And if you get once McAvoy returns and you get him and McAvoy together, I think that's going to be a really strong top pairing. So that would be my candidate to be a breakout for this season. And as I mentioned, with the new head coach, wouldn't surprise me if Brandon Carlo is a hell of a lot better. So I would put Lindholm for sure, and then maybe Carlo. And I would also say, same with a full confident season of Jake DeBrusk. And again, but you guys do remember what happened the last time I made a huge preseason prediction about Jake DeBrusk. It went very south. So he is not my breakout candidate, but wouldn't surprise me if he had a really good season. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say, because last time I did, it just didn't work out. So I'm going to leave that to the side, and I'll put Hampus Lindholm as my breakout candidate. Bust candidate, there's not a ton I look at. I don't think anyone in the top 6 is due for a huge regression, because I think all signs point to DeBrusk having, continuing the strong second half he had and doing that for a full season, especially with Jim Montgomery as head coach. I would probably go with Charlie Coyle. And here's why, because I think Coyle was actually solid last year. But again, if they do deal Craig Smith, or if they do something else with Craig Smith, they dealt DeBrusk and moved Craig Smith into the top 6 or something like that, and it's Coyle between 2 younger guys, good kind of candidate to see a little bit of regression in points and production. So again, it's not really him. It's more if he gets put with, if he's kind of the leader of the kids in the bottom 6, it would not surprise me to see a little less production out of him, which I guess would constitute him being a bust. In net, we have not mentioned goalie once this episode, which is a testament to how well it worked last year. I know a lot of people think Linus Ullmark is a waste of money. I don't. I think it actually kind of worked out the way that he was able to give Swayman rest and step in when needed. So I don't see either of those guys regressing. Will the goalie hug continue? That is my question to this episode. I'd have to imagine it would, right? Like I know in baseball, when the outfielders come together and do, like the Red Sox used to have their dance they used to do. They used to come together and, they'd be taking pictures and doing dances. And then they switched it because they change every year. I think the goalie hug stays the same. There's not a lot you can do when you're in big goalie pads. You can't do all these crazy things, and everybody loved the hug. So I think the goalie hug will stay in place. That's my question for this episode. I brought forward the really hard hitting question on this episode. So yeah, that is today's episode. All Q&A, all good questions. I appreciate all the support as always. And usually I ask Connor to tell you what he's got coming up. For me, just go subscribe to Bruins Rinkside on YouTube. That's all I'll ask you to do. If you're not already, I know a lot of you are watching this on YouTube, but some of you listening just by audio, go hit the subscribe button on Bruins Rinkside. Really appreciate it. A lot of stuff coming up this year, especially. A lot of stuff coming up. So anyways, without further ado, this has been Bruins Beat. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.